talk about. And for those commissioners that are new to the area commission process, thank you very much for joining us and for taking on this charge. So, with that, Ms. Toya, I will turn it over to, I guess, Councilmember Tyson. You're up next. And so I will turn this over to our zoning chair, Councilmember Priscilla Tyson.
Thank you, Director Carla Williams Scott. And I also want to thank the area commissioners and the civic associations that may be on this call today. I truly appreciate the work that you do in our community each and every day. You volunteer your time, and we appreciate that. I also want to say thank you to Toya, who's worked hard on putting this meeting together, and she's been doing this for a few years now. So appreciate her work. I know Tony Solis is on the call, and I just appreciate all the work that the Building and Zoning Services does in an effort to make sure that we are having, zonings and variances for our community. And certainly, again, couldn't do without the Department of Neighborhoods and their work, and just appreciate the work that they're doing right now so that we can continue on with our with the zoning and variances within our communities. They can come to you, you can vote on them and move forward. So thank you. All right, so next slide. So the role of the City Council as the zoning chair really does sets the zoning agenda, and that occurs after it's gone through a process, and that process is once the zoning applications have gone through various approvals, staff approvals, or staff looks at the staff, the development commission, as well as your area commissions. And so once it's gone through that process, whether that be a approval or disapproval, then it comes to city council. I know what you're seeing on the slide is I think many of you who've been to a council meeting, there's a zoning agenda. Next slide, please. And again, so the process is that, developers, agents will come to the area commissions, and when they come out to the commission meeting, they want to hear your voice. So they want to hear your voice once they're sharing the development's going to happen in your community, because area commissions do reflect the voice of the community. And that's where the developers will either get an approval or disapproval based upon their presentations to you. Thank you. Next slide. So after the staff and the development commission, the staff, this is staff recommendation. So the city will then make a recommendation, and the city will make recommendations based upon a couple things. They're looking at an area plan. They will look at recs and parks. They will look for traffic, utility needs. They'll look at safety. They look at a number of areas, but their main focus is to really look at, is there any conflicts within the city code before they are making their recommendations. And this is an independent review, which is posted on the city website with recommendations for changes. And the recommendations may happen before or after the commissioners review or vote on it. So there's sometimes they're going to vote, they make a recommendation prior to voting. There's going to be sometimes they'll make the recommendation after voting, and Tony may speak to that. Next slide. And then there's the Development Commission. And so there are 7 members of the commission. Right now we have 6, and we are waiting on the mayor's appointment of the 7th person. The Development Commission looks at the city staff's recommendation. They also will evaluate your area commission's recommendations. And they also listen to and evaluate the testimony of the individual or speakers who attend the Development Commission meeting. And they want to hear your input from you. They also are really just focused on land use. So, but they also think about, traffic, buffering, the minimum code requirements, the area plan, utility considerations, and recreation in parks. But they're focused really on, again, the land use. Okay. All right, so the city council agenda is set, as you know, 2 weeks in advance. And so, for example, zonings that will appear on our May 18th agenda, they will be approved this week so that the clerk's office can send out notices to the residents within 125 feet of the property 10 days prior to the zoning being voted on by city council. Something else that City Council did this year, working with Building and Zoning Services, is that we worked with our area commissions to be able to have signs in your community so that your neighbors would know when there's going to be a zoning hearing within the area commission so that they can come to the meeting and give input. So that was another very important way, because we'd also sometimes heard that people didn't know that when there was going to be a zoning or variance hearing. And so having those, and there'll be more signs out. Well, more signs will be coming back out this year, but I'm sure Tony will also speak to that. Okay, what do area commissions and residents typically, how do you engage council on a zoning or a variance? Well, generally, we hear from you when there is opposition. Rarely do we get to hear from you when everything's going well, and that's fine. But when there's opposition, there are a couple ways to reach out to us. It would be usually we won't even get we won't have the ordinance until you have either approved it or disapproved it. So there oftentimes you as area commissioners and your residents will call us and share with us their disapproval prior to us getting that. You can still do that and share that information with us, but until we actually get that particular ordinance, we can meet with you, but we rarely will have any substantive discussions until there's been a vote made by either the area commission and or some civic associations. And so when we have a disapproval, and this is a disapproval, whether it be from the city staff has a disapproval or the area commission has a disapproval, prior to us moving forward with that, we will then want to have a conversation with you. And so some of the reasons we get disapprovals are, is it really, sometimes we've had area commissions that it will not necessarily be a zoning issue. It may be another issue as to why you did not want the zoning or variance within your community. It may be that we don't even like the developer. The developer made a presentation. We don't like that developer, so we all voted no. And um, and so what would happen in that regard? Of course, that's not a zoning issue. We need to try to figure out what's going on with that developer. How did they make their presentation? What are the issues and concerns? And try to figure out and work that out. We also hear opposition when around parking spaces. And in that regard, we again are going to reach out and I'll talk more about that. But if it's for parking spaces, we need to have a good understanding as to why or why not do we need the number of parking spaces. We have setbacks, density, traffic, and height. And right now, from a zoning perspective, we're hearing a lot. We're getting a lot of disapprovals based upon density. And certainly, this is something that I know Director Carla Williams Scott. We're also looking at we we know that we need to have our city is continuing to grow, and we only have so much land in our city, and so we're building up as opposed to building out. So you're finding that we're building not as many single family houses in our community. We're trying to make sure we're building affordable housing, workforce housing, market rate housing, and a lot of that happens to be density, being apartments, condos, etc. So that is something that is important to our city, but also just because we're growing, and we have to go, and we have to build up. We also, again, I want to make sure I'm just continuing to state this. We definitely need to have more of the workforce and affordable housing in our community to make sure we're taking care of all the residents. Um, and so what happens then, I'm going to go to the next slide, I think, because so anytime there is an opposition, I'm always going to ask questions. So when I'm asking questions, I'm always going to try to balance the needs of the city while honoring the voice of the community. And that again is where we're talking about density and traffic. I'm born and raised in Columbus, and it used to be a time where we didn't have a lot of traffic. And now we do have a lot more traffic in our community because of our residents. We have a lot more residents in our community, and we're anticipating a lot more residents in our community. And so we are going to be a city that will have more traffic. And again, we're going to have more density in our community, as I just mentioned. So, what oftentimes we're trying to look at balance, what is the best public policy decision based upon what we know is going to happen in our community. And oftentimes I will hear, well, our area plan calls for something different, and my answer to that is that the area plan was probably it was probably approved many years ago, and even before it was even approved, work was done on it before that. And so again, our community has changed, and so we're always mindful of that. Next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, I reach out to all parties. So when I even get a vote that's like a 5-5 vote, a 5-5 vote is still going to be is still a disapproval. But I'm going to still make the phone call and talk with the zoning chair, if I can, and or the chairperson of the area commission, so that I have a good understanding as to why there was a 5-5 vote, and try to work with hear why that happened. And based upon that, I will also ask, is there any negotiating in that situation? And then after I hear that information, I will then reach out to the developer or the applicant and ask them, based upon my conversation with the area commit with the commission. I'm going to ask them, based upon what I've heard from the area commission, are there any concessions that could be made? Can there be a good neighbor agreement? What can we do to move this forward? And that may be because staff will. So, for an example, so if staff's approved it, the development commission's approved it, but the area commission did not approve it, then again, I'm going to ask all those questions of all parties. And the same where if the staff disapproves it and an area commission approves it, I'm still going to reach out to the staff to ask them, why did they disapprove this? I always am going to ask those questions so that I feel like I can get a really full picture. And then the best of my ability, I'm going to spend time talking to all parties again to see if there's a way that we can have some resolution. And then if a resolution, after working to try to figure out a resolution, then then what I'm going to do next is then um, we'll have conversations with my council colleagues and say, here's the application, here's what's happened, and start to get a feel for how they would how, how they would vote on that and answer any of their questions. And so what will happen after I've had those conversations? Um, then we'll look at what is really the best policy decision. So there have been times that when an area commission has said, like I said, they've said yes, the city staff has said no, and we will still vote with the area commission. There, if we think that that's what the commission wants to do. There are also times when the uh, area commission will vote no, and that and the council will want to be supportive. Now, when that happens, and it probably we think we recently we went and looked at some records, and I think the majority of the time, so I want to say about between 90 and 95% of the time, when council will uh, vote in opposition of the area commission, it's only been about either 5 or 10% of the time, because your voice is important. It is very important. And what we're and then it's very important, and we try to share if there's going to be a vote against what the air commission has stated, we really try to share why that has happened. For an example, some of the reasons that of late it may have been a lot around affordable housing and density, and it's because of public policy that we know that we need affordable housing, and we know um, that we need the density. And those are probably the two reasons that if we've had to vote against an area commission. There are times when, again, the area commission has voted no, and it's really been about not necessarily a zoning issue, but it could be a reason that, again, I didn't like how the developer presented, and we voted no. And so what we try to do then is go and work with that developer and try to get it worked out, and to try to move that legislation forward. But generally speaking, council has been very supportive of your vote, because your vote is important, and we do take the time whenever, even if we have to. If we vote against, we try to still work out what else can we do, because we know we need this. So, what else can we do to make sure that whatever the reason that you felt you did not want it, what can we do to to be supportive of some of the things that you may want? So how do we have a good neighbor agreement to make sure that some of the issues that you brought up, we can get those worked out? I think that something that I've also said, and I've seen this couple questions pop up in regards to density, traffic, affordable housing, et cetera. I have certainly talked with my other council colleagues, I know, and the administration, because we do need to make sure that we're educating all the area commissions as to what the needs of the city happen to be, so that when you are making decisions in your communities, that you have a good understanding of what we need. I'll make this last comment, and then I know that give you a few some you can ask me a couple questions. But the one other area, and this was something that worked out beautifully, Carla, Director Scott, and this is when Director Shoney was here, and let's see here, and we were in the Linden area, and we were looking to put some affordable housing on Cleveland Avenue. What that really required was that Director Scott, Director Shoney, and myself went up on a Saturday, spent a few hours talking to the residents there, giving them a good understanding of where the city's agenda was in terms of of density and affordable housing. And once that information was communicated, we didn't ask them to take another vote, but they didn't come and they were in council chambers. They didn't speak against it, because they understood that that was important to start having some new development in their community. And those are the kinds of things that we really try to, communicate, and we probably should have a better job of communicating. And I think the administration and council realizes that. So that's something that we will continue to work on. But we are your partner. We appreciate you taking all the time that you take to be able to work on these zonings and variances. And again, I said about 90% of the time, we are absolutely supportive of what your recommendation happens to be. And so lastly, in turn, I think the next, so again, we know that we want to involve people in the problem and work out the solution together. And so again, that's what we try to do to the very best of our ability, and working with all sides to make that happen. Go to the next slide. And so, if again, you could always feel free to contact all the council members. Generally, whatever committees you chair, the other members look to that chair to be able to provide them with information. And so, but you can call any of us, email us, have asked for meetings with us. And then the next slide will be the team that you'll be talking to for zonings. So initially, you will probably speak to Carl. He's for constituent issues and scheduling, but Nicole and Andrew Dwyer, who's our senior policy advisor, who is also our zoning coordinator. When you're initially calling, probably the first two people you will speak to on our team is going to be Nicole and Andrew. They will ask a number of questions of you, as they will do with the applicant. Once they provide me with that information, especially on the disapprovals, then the next step is for me to get involved and to begin to reach out and to have conversations with the area commissioners and the applicant. And that's pretty much, we're here to serve you. And that's kind of an overview of what we do at council once we get the zoning application. And I'm open to a few questions so we can stay on the timeline.
So I shared in the group chat that, so Councilmember Tyson, I shared in the group chat that we would take the questions at the end so that we can make sure everybody gets through their presentations, if that's okay.
Okay, and then they can also send questions to our offices too.
Okay, and I've also asked for folks to put your questions in the chat. We are monitoring that so that we can track those and address those at the end of all the presentations. So I'm going to move to the next presentation. Just give me 1 second. And Tony, you're up.
I am here. Thank you, Toy. You hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Good evening, folks. My name is Tony Celebrezzi. I am the Assistant Director of the City of Columbus Building Zoning Services Department, and wanted to give you an overview of the entire department. You all will interact much with our zoning side of the house, but in order to get a full picture, I will go over a little bit of how our building side operates. So, and with Councilmember Tyson as our lead council member, things continue to work out pretty well. So, next slide, Toya. So, basically, BZS, our acronym, we have different processes. Zoning clearance, which is basically allowing the use on a particular parcel. We have site development, building plan review, which is how the building's built. We have permitting and inspection process after the building begins to get built. And all of that is basically to ensure that the land development is a safe and sturdy building and meets the designs of the particular areas. Our city is incredibly diverse, with areas that are historic to more modern areas. It's difficult to compare and quite frankly to write a zoning code that matches Victorian Village and Westgate and the far south side. But that's part of what the different processes we have that that we use to try to reach decisions and so forth. So, and the source of what we do and how we make our decision is not only in city code, but we adhere as a building department. We adhere to the Ohio Building Code, which is set by the state and by the Ohio Board of Building Standards. So any type of fashion with how buildings are built is generally covered under the state building code, and that's what we enforce. So next slide. So as I said, our building section, we meet regularly with the building industry to ensure that we meet timelines for how to review plans and to have the schedule that we meet. We also have an engineering section that helps coordinate close to 12.5 different city departments and agencies. And then the zoning side of our house, basically zoning is what is an allowable use on a particular parcel within a zoning district. And then not only what is the use is, how is it built? Is it built right on the sidewalk with no setback? Is it a 10-foot setback? Are there requirements in particular zoning areas for parcels to be of certain sizes? Are you allowed to cover your lot in your house and continue to expand? Parking requirements, which is always something that the area commissions are looking at, is part of how we set zoning districts, and within those there is ratios for how many parking spaces should be allocated to each particular unit. So next slide. So as I said, we've kind of got three sections. We got building, engineering, and zoning. The building section is made up of engineers that review plans. The building side basically deals with the walls in on any type of project. So anything basically from the walls in, how do they attach the floor beams to hold the walls together, to putting the roof on, all of that falls under the state building code. And our building section, they review the plans. They have 30 days to make comment. Once those plans are approved, the builder has to adhere to those building plans. Within that building plan approval is an inspection schedule. So they have to have rough inspections all the way through to the final inspection. And then we have a compliance section that works when individuals are not following the building code, or an individual has a building that is unsafe or has been impacted by a car accident. Our compliance section makes sure that those folks repair that building, A, in the proper fashion, and B, do it in a timely fashion. Our engineering section that I mentioned earlier that coordinates all these different city agencies, they basically deal with the walls out, the site development. How is the building, where's the building going to be built? How are they going to get services to it, water and sewer? How are they going to interact with the traffic patterns on that street? Do we need to restrict how they access that road? And so folks come in and we have a thing called one-stop shop, and that is basically an easy, quick review to basically take care of minor problems on a potential site plan, and then from there it gets into our full process. As you can see under the city agencies, that's just a few of the ones that we deal with and that you're going to hear about: rec and parks, sewers and drains, traffic management, and utilities. So go ahead and hit the next slide. All right, so the section of our office that you're going to be most interacting with is our zoning section. They deal with there's a zoning clearance group that basically approves or disapproves the use on a parcel. We track, in modern times, we've tracked the different uses on a parcel and have to provide zoning approval or zoning clearance when you want to do a use other than what was there currently. We have a council activities section. They deal with rezonings, and that's changing the actual zoning district of a parcel. They also deal with council variance applications. Council variance is council telling an applicant, we know you're not allowed to do use X because of the current zoning district, but a council variance allows them to add that use to that zoning district. A good example of that is the Jeffrey Place residential mixed-use area going in just north of downtown in Italian Village. That is still technically zone manufacturing, but they got a council variance to allow residential in there. This is also occurring on the south side down on South High Street, about a block west of High Street. There's a strip of what was manufacturing and now is being bought up and developed as multifamily. Many of those have gone with council variances, and so conceivably somebody could still put a manufacturing use next door to a multifamily residential. That's a challenge, or that's the gamble that the developer is taking. Our third section within the zoning is BZS, Board of Zoning Adjustments, and the graphics section. Board of Zoning Adjustment, they deal with characteristics of, or variances to the characteristics within a zoning district. So they are the ones that deal with parking variances, setback variances, height variances. They don't deal with the actual use. As I was mentioning before, putting a residential in a manufacturing district, or another one is putting residential on the first floor in a commercial district. Those would be going to council. Those would not go to BZA. Graphics deals with signage and how the signage is placed in front, and how the signs are attached and developed. So basically graphics deals with variances to that. So we come to the portion that really impacts you all. You all play a big role as area commissioners in our zoning process. You consider these applications for variances and variances only. If people build a project that is code compliant, then they have every right to build it there without quite frankly, without needing to go to the area commissions. However, if they want something special, they want reduced zoning, they want reduced parking, reduced setbacks, or wanting a different use in there, they need to come before you all in the area commissions and talk to you about why they think their project is worthy of your support. You all are going to be looking at a project from a neighborhood standpoint. This is going to be in your neighborhood. You're using a different filter than the city staff is, because we're looking at it strictly from the code language and the development language. You all are looking at this from the standpoint of your neighborhood. How is it going to fit in? Does the architecture that they're going to use, does it fit in with your neighborhood? Is this a comparable use to what is already occurring in that area? So you all provide recommendations on these applications to Development Commission, Council, Board of Zoning Adjustments, or Graphics Commission. So we have a form that you all use and explain your recommendations to us. We always try to ask you don't do conditional approvals, but sometimes that's the only way that you all and the developers can meet in the middle somewhere, so that a project can move forward. You all have a responsibility to hear what the developers say in a timely fashion. We ask that you do that, so that, because while it is your neighborhood, they do own the property. They haven't made investments in that. So we're all trying to get to where we have a good, strong city and good healthy neighborhoods. Next slide. So you all do not do architectural review. I see a question there. That is only in architectural review. However, you all can ask for a rendering to understand what is there, and you can always ask of developers to some degree almost anything you want. The developers don't always have to go along with you or agree to what you're looking at. But many developers try to work with neighborhood groups because they understand it is your neighborhood, it is your backyard, and you want something that fits in. So, all right, to the slide here, and I know Toya is going to be sending out the slides after the presentation, and I highly recommend that you all go through the slides, especially mine, re-review them. My email and phone number are at the end. Call me anytime, and I will walk you through things. One of the biggest tools that we have that is accessible to you all is our GIS map, and that is our zoning GIS map. It will tell you all kinds of information that you may or may not want to know, from what the parcel is zoned to when it was zoned at. If there's any type of variance on it, it will have a link to the actual ordinance. We've got most of those scanned in, so you can go back and actually see what what the agreements were when a particular variance was obtained by a developer. The different colors on there represent commercial is the red or pinkish. The darker yellow is multifamily, and the regular bright yellow is single family residential. And there's all kinds of information located once you click on that parcel. As you can see down the right-hand side, it will give you a lot of information. Let's go to the next slide. So when you click on a parcel, you get a sub box. Like I said, it shows in this particular case as a zoning ordinance that was passed. I can't see how small that is, but it will give you the information on the zoning. If you click through the little arrow at the top of that little box there to the right, one of the key pieces of information to look things up is the parcel ID number. That is much easier, much better to utilize that than an address, because addresses can be multiple addresses and all kinds of different things. So parcel address, or the parcel ID number is key. Go ahead and flip to the next slide, please. Also, when you click that small right triangle there, you get this large I, and that will link you to the county auditor's website. And on there, obviously, you can find all kinds of additional information of who owns it, who bought it, when they bought it, how, the whole transfer lineage of a particular parcel. It's just more information to help you understand who owns it, what's what is going on, and that's the portion where you're going to find the parcel ID numbers on top of that. So go ahead and flip to the next slide, please. So that's what you'll look at when you get to the county auditor's Stingiano's website. Down that left-hand side, you got the land profile, improvements, permits. That's always an interesting one. If you click on that permit button, we upload every month every building permit that we issue, from a new build multi-story structure to replacing a hot water tank. So somebody is, just a side note here, somebody's advertising someplace, got total renovations and stuff, and there's nothing in the permits, it's likely they didn't pull permits and had us inspecting things, which can lead to challenges down the road. The transfers button down there will show you the ownership transfer and then the history of it. So next slide, please. All right, there is our website, which has a lot of information on it. You can get lost in there, but there's a lot of information broken out into different tabs. You've got my phone number, you got my email address there, and we are. I can answer any questions. Feel free to give me a call, send me an email. I am working most days until about 11 or 12 o'clock each day right now, even under the stay-at-home orders, because most of my job has got to be done in the office. So, and John, if you want to reach out to me, we can talk about the auto. Your question about the auto uses there. The one thing to remember for everybody is, if a use is non-conforming or is grandfathered, it means that use was in a particular on a particular parcel before it was zoned, before it was given that zoning designation. And unfortunately, there are many parcels like that, thousands of them throughout the city, because the city has got some older parts. We got areas that were annexed in, and those areas were annexed in based on what the use was at the time. And so while we try to be as consistent as possible, there are inconsistencies throughout the city. With a city of 222 square miles, you're going to have challenges and inconsistencies. So and the only other thing, I think Councilmember Tyson covered it pretty well, but we will be, when we get kind of back to a new normal, we will be utilizing zoning signs. So anytime a parcel is going to have a rezoning or a council variance, you'll see a small sign pop up out there that will tell people in the neighborhood this parcel is being considered for rezoning or a council variance. To learn more, call. So, and then I will end on this. All of the cases that you all receive can be accessed through our citizens portal on our homepage. Your best contact, and they will be listed on what you receive, is going to be the zoning case manager. They will know everything about that case, and they will share everything that they have with you about that case. So those are your best points of contact initially. If you can't get questions, I know their supervisor, Chris Prezzuti, is always available, as am I. So thank you for your time. And Jennifer, we still suggest and strongly recommend sending out postcard notifications for your particular area commission meetings, because we will not have that information with the zoning signs. So anyhow, thank you, Toya, for having me and giving me this time. Take care.
No problem. Thanks so much, Tony. Our next presenter is Heather Truesdale from Code Enforcement. So give me just a moment and I will bring up her presentation. Okay. And Heather, you are free to begin whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Truesdale. I'm the administrator of the Code Enforcement Division. And Toya, if you could go to the next slide. The director of our division is Michael Stevens. And if you would go to the next slide. From Code Enforcement Division, we have geographic boundaries. There are 9 supervisors that cover all of the geographic boundaries located in the city of Columbus, and work primarily with all of the community groups and block walk groups, and most of the inspections that we get are processed through the 311 call center, and then assigned to code officers that have specific areas that they will do inspections on. Each inspector handles issuing orders. They're basically case managers to process a case from start to finish, work with residents, try to get compliance. I think one of the most common violations that we deal with is trash and debris, high grass and weeds, especially at this time of the year. We also deal with interior housing issues. We do inspections on licensed facilities. We enforce everything from city housing codes, and that is interior and exterior violations, zoning regulations. A lot of what Tony talked about, we are the enforcement arm of that process. So we do dive into dealing with businesses where they have site plans and they're not following their existing site plan, to issue violations and work with them to bring the property in compliance. We also work with the Department of BZS quite frequently on the graphics issues. You, believe it or not, graphics require permits and banners require permits. And if you're going to change a sign, it does require a permit to do that. A lot of what we do, as I mentioned, was help sanitation issues. Anything on private property, trash, debris, solid waste. Again, there's just under 4,000 vacant structures in the city of Columbus right at this moment. We just got done doing our survey. That is down significantly from past years. And you know, a lot of what the code officers, a lot of the complaints are high grass and weeds, solid waste, and trash, where you have vacant properties that aren't being maintained. Thankfully, we will try to reach out to the owners of the property. If we can't get them to respond to our request, we have contractors that will actually be assigned and contract cut and clean those yards, and will actually assess those to their taxes for the next year. If you could go to the next slide, it will show you the areas that we have. And as I stated before, I probably could get a better map in the presentation. These are the different areas that are located in the cities. There's a couple supervisors that have 2 areas, but again, it's color coded. Supervisor and a set of staff is assigned to a specific area and develop relationships with the block watch groups and residents in the neighborhood to try to address all of the code issues that exist in the area. If you could go to the next slide. Well, thank you. So some of the common interior code violations that we deal with housing violations and inspections, anywhere from plumbing, electric, HVAC, structural issues. We work, a lot with the building folks. If we see things that need a closer look, we definitely will refer it to the Building and Zoning Services Department. We deal with unsanitary conditions, hoarding situations, where somebody is living in a property that's not safe. There's no egress, or it's, they can't maintain a clean and sanitary dwelling unit. We definitely get involved in those situations. We also frequently, when we're doing inspections, in every interior inspection that we do, we conduct a life safety checklist, which involves looking at a property to see if there's a CO issue from the gas burning appliances, if there's smoke detectors on each floor, is there egress, proper egress? Are there any visible electrical issues? Things like that. Those are done at every interior inspection that we complete. And Toya, I think if you go to the next slide, there's a couple pictures of some of the things that we've run across. Next slide. So some of the common exterior violations could be vacant structures not being secured to code. There is a strict code standard in place that requires vacant structures to be boarded to code, and that's doors, windows, all openings of a structure have to be boarded and painted, and then all exterior violations and a whole host of other code violations have to be in compliance for it to be considered within city code standards. We also deal with roof, gutter issues, downspouts, chimneys, porches in disrepair, siding, windows, foundations, exposed bare wood, accessory structures. If it can, we look at those to make sure that those they are in good repair. Another common violation is yard maintenance. Again, we have two code sections that kind of address those yard maintenance issues, and also dead and dying trees is another one that's come up recently. So that's common. And if you could go to the next slide, I think there's some photographs of some of the. Okay, next slide. As I stated a moment ago, there's vacant structures is definitely a complaint that we get quite frequently. There is strict standards in place that require a building to be boarded to code, and that means all openings have to be boarded. The roof and flashing has to be in good repair. It can't have graffiti. They can't have weeds, solid waste. The whole entire exterior of the premises has to be maintained. And I think if you go to the next slide, there's some photos of properties that are not boarded to code. So some of the common zoning violations that we deal with are outdoor storage, junk salvage. Believe it or not, there is a code that prohibits you from storing things to the exterior premise of the properties. Vehicles parked in required yards, commercial vehicles in residential districts, boats, trailers in front of setback areas, motor vehicle repair, businesses, home occupation, yard sales. There's time restrictions in place that prohibit you from having a yard sale. Let's say every day, that would be a code violation. I've mentioned before signage and graphics and site plan violations. We work really closely with the zoning department to try to get people in compliance with those standards. A lot of their records is what we rely on for evidence if we can't get compliance to prosecute cases. Inoperable motor vehicles. Believe it or not, if you have one flat tire, your vehicle is not considered inoperable. If you have two, then it is one of the standards that's in place that considers it to be inoperable. There's also encroachment issues that prohibit things in the right of way. If we could go to the next slide, I think there's some photographs of some of the things I mentioned. Common health and sanitation issues. This is in Title VII. We deal with solid waste, trash and debris, high grass and weeds, pest infestation, roach infestation, bed bugs is something that we write in this category. If we're doing interior inspections and we come across those situations, we will issue property owners violation notices to take care of those issues. Again, I think I recently have been looking at, due to the COVID-19, we've kind of revamped how we're addressing code violations. It's been just a new way of doing business. And so I've really looked at, what the volume of complaints is at this very moment. And it is absolutely significantly high with solid waste. It's not as high as it had been in past years for high grass and weeds, but the trash and debris complaints are are 3 times what any other complaints that we're getting at this time of year. So we're ramping up to try to figure out a new way to address all of those issues here in the next few months. I think if you move to the next slide, Toya, there's some photos of that. So as I said before, we work very closely with the Building and Zoning Services Department for zoning issues, but we also work with them on structural issues. And when we run across anybody that's altering structures or doing work without permits or doesn't have registration to do work in some of the historic area commissions, a certificate of appropriateness is required. If we run across home improvement contractors that are working without license, we would definitely, notify the building section, work with the building compliance team, and try to address those issues collaboratively with them. If you would please go to the next slide. So our process. We are primarily complaint driven. I say this with letting you know that we do have a PACE team that I can talk a little bit about as well. But we are primarily complaint driven. So the complaint comes in, gets assigned to a code officer. The code officer goes out and tries to investigate it, make a determination on if it's a violation, and then issue a violation notice to all responsible parties. If you could move to the next slide. As I stated before, they're basically case managers for these situations that work to gain compliance. 85% of our cases we get compliance on. 15% we run into situations where we have to seek legal action and find another way to resolve the issue. A lot of what they're doing is communicating with the responsible parties, emailing, talking with folks on the phone, trying to meet them at the property and discuss, what the situations. Again, our goal is compliance. And if you could move to the next slide. So if we do have to file a case, a majority of our cases are currently are going criminal or civil. We work closely with the city attorneys to find out how to best resolve those types of issues. If we have an existing case, we have the ability to file contempt to make sure that the case continues to try to be resolved. If you could go to the next slide, Toya, because I think this slide is in the wrong place, but that's my fault. So another part of the process, if we are at the stage where we issued a violation notice and we give a resident anywhere from 20 to 30 days to comply if it's a non-emergency issue, we go to the reinspection stage and determine that it hasn't been brought into compliance and additional 30 days is required. We sometimes follow that up with an emergency or with a warning letter, or we consult with the city attorneys and try to have a stronger letter of compliance issued to the resident to try to encourage them to bring it into compliance. If that doesn't work, again, we could take court action. We have the option of going civil or criminal. That again involves discussions with the city attorneys to determine what process is the best fit. So if you could move to the next slide. So a number of things of what they do is collect evidence to make sure that they can get care and control with a person who is responsible for the issue. And some of the things that they run up against is making sure that they can visibly see things from the public right away. It's not enough for someone to provide a violation or a photograph of a code violation for us to issue orders. The code officer has to see that for themselves. Ultimately, the property owners are responsible for anything that is on their property, and we definitely try to find all responsible parties. Owner could be the occupant, could be anyone who's in care and control of the property. If you could go to the next slide. We also run across businesses, LLCs, and deal with statutory agents. So there's a great deal of research that goes into trying to find some of the responsible parties in the cases that we prepare. So we use Secretary of State website to look up LLCs and corporations to determine who those agents are and get good addresses for them. If you could move to the next slide. Criminal penalties could be are whatever existed on that day that the photograph was taken and the affidavit was filed. We do have a repeat offenders process that if somebody continually violates the code, we have the ability to take that person to court without issuing an order. We do try to find out the name, the birth date using our accurate checks. We civil charges civil process is a little bit different. We definitely try to we have hearings, we attend hearings, code officers testify at those hearings to code issues that exist. So if you could go to the next slide. Basic code sections that we enforce are Title 45, Title 33, which is the zoning code, and Title 7. We also have a section in the Title 9 code that talks about snow removal. And as I stated before, we are primarily complaint driven. We have a team that is called the Proactive Code Enforcement Team. I don't have a slide for that. It has been a team that's been in existence for 5 years. They deal with problematic landlords in the city of Columbus, and they respond to systematic inspections that from requests from community members like yourselves to address maybe a smaller block area, going house to house, addressing code violations. They've been very successful at dealing with problematic landlords, and they've made bad landlords good and encouraged some that maybe weren't following the code as well as we'd hope they would into divesting properties. So that team has really been a game changer for the city, and had a positive impact. Again, Toya, if you could go to the next slide. If you have a code violation and would like to report a code violation, please visit the 311, either email, visit the website and submit a service request. You can do it anonymously, or use the My Columbus app. That is how we get code issues processed. They interface with our Excel system and get assigned to a code inspector immediately and scheduled for inspection. So with that, thank you, Toya, for having me. Thank you all for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. So and we're going to keep moving on the agenda, and we're actually pretty close to time. Our next presentation is going to be from our public health area. Rebecca, give me just a second, and I will pull up your presentation. All right. Go. All right. We are. All right, Rebecca, it's all yours.
Thank you, Toya. Can everybody hear me? Good. Well, the first slide has my name on it and how you can reach me. So I want to encourage, I saw the notes that this presentation will be sent out to everybody. So please feel free to call or email me if you have any questions that come up after today's presentation. But I'm the Community Engagement Strategic Advisor. I work directly with Dr. Maishika Roberts. Can you go to the next slide, please, Toya? And while we're kicking off the presentation on public health today, I just want to also say today is National Nurses Day. And where would we be without the nurses, whether they're family members or care providers? So I just want to take a minute to acknowledge essential workers in general, but particularly nurses today. So who is public health and where are we? We serve the city of Columbus and Worthington. We have a 5-member board of health. We have about 500 staff. We have 40 plus public health programs. We have the main campus, which I believe many of you are familiar with, which is at Parsons, on Parsons and Main. But there are a number of satellite sites as well with our WIC, Women, Infant, and Children clinics. And since December 2017, our new health commissioner, Dr. Maishika Roberts, has been in place as a health commissioner, and it's an honor to work with her. As you may have seen by all the coverage around COVID-19, Columbus Public Health is a leader in improving the health and safety of Columbus and Worthington residents. We monitor community health status, we identify and address public health threats, we enforce laws that protect the public's health, and provide services to prevent and control disease. In essence, everything that public health does is address and begins with our lives where we live, learn, work, and play. And the other piece that I wanted to share is we are committed to addressing the root causes of health inequities and working to create opportunities for the attainment of the highest level of health for all people. Could you go to the next slide, please? So this is just a quick snapshot of the various areas that are in public health. There's a wide range of programs. As I mentioned earlier, we have 40 plus programs, but we have programs that encompass clinical, environmental, health promotion, addiction, health equity, family health, and population-based services. Today, I'll be giving an overview of a selection of programs, including the brand new Center for Public Health Innovation. I won't have time today to cover the many other services, but I believe Toya has sent out a brochure which lists all of the services that are available to our residents at Public Health. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is a brand new initiative that's coming out of the City of Columbus and headed up by Dr. Roberts and the team at Columbus Public Health. It's called the Center for Public Health Innovation. And you may have seen a number of media stories around racial disparities in chronic diseases. And you may have also heard the term the social determinants of health, which is in essence all the things that factor in our health, right? And these things existed before COVID-19 pandemic, but being in the COVID-19 pandemic has increased disparities in our awareness. And we're particularly tracking poor health outcomes for African American residents in our communities. So the mission for this new center is to increase the expectancy, the life expectancy, and raise the quality of life by reducing health inequities. The team will develop recommendations for Mayor Ginther to address racism and health disparities in Columbus to protect the health and improve the lives of all people. And if you have any questions specific to the center, I would ask you Ellen Bennett, and her information is there in the slide. Can you go to the next slide, please, Toya? I've pulled a few things that over the years, area commissioners have asked for information about. And one of the set is active living resources. We know right now, particularly with the stay-at-home order, that being a little more active is part of our health plan for ourselves and our families. So the things that you can receive advocacy for or receive information about include sidewalks, bike lanes and trails, walking audits, walking and biking maps, pedestrian and bicycle education, and of course the Safe Routes to School programs, which has been highlighted a lot, unfortunately, in the last year. But that team really works hard with our area colleagues across the city to make sure that our children have a safe passage to school. Can you go to the next slide, please? The other thing that we sometimes get asked questions about is the local food action plan. And I was remiss in not mentioning Councilmember Tyson for her leadership in both the walking programs and the food action plan for the city and the county. But this plan focuses on improving access to and education about healthy food, affordable food, and local food. This program also provides extensive support for community gardens through annual grants. And many of you live in neighborhoods that have community gardens that have been funded through this initiative. So area commissioners, those of you who are on this call, who engage in food system related projects to provide access to food, education about food, food-related jobs, or preventing food waste. And those who want to support community gardens can contact Columbus Public Health for help in connecting to resources and expertise. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, tobacco is not necessarily the sexiest topic, but it's an important one because we know morbidity is high with tobacco-related practices. So public health has a multifaceted approach to reducing exposure to deadly secondhand smoke. In addition to smoke-free parks and schools, we provide assistance to property owners, property managers, and residents to help implement smoke-free policies. Smoke-free multi-unit housing is especially important because even if nobody in your unit may smoke, you and your family can be exposed to toxins traveling through the air from other units. In addition, cigarettes are the #1 cause of residential fire-related deaths, so going smoke-free improves safety as well. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this slide briefly highlights our neighborhood social services team. And in the last year, you might have heard lots of media about the Columbus Care Coalition. This was created several years ago, but has been really heightened in part of the city's safety strategy plan. The Care Coalition reaches out and provides trauma-informed resources. It also provides connections of our residents to very necessary resources after a violent incident has taken place. They also create awareness and they equip people and organizations to look at trauma through a different lens in order to respond in a positive and consistent way. The other team that works very closely with the Care Coalition is our neighborhood social work team. This is made up of a team of public health social workers. These staff work in the community to help community residents improve their health by linking them to resources, health assessments, and screenings that are available. And this team works broadly and widely with a number of city health departments, including the Department of Neighborhoods. Can you go to the next slide, please, Toya? So we do have an initiative called CPH Connects. Shalini Madireddy is the person who heads that up for us. But this is a way that you as a commissioner, if you want to have Columbus Public Health, whether it's a speaker or it's information about a particular issue that you think would be important in your neighborhood, this is where you can reach out to us to ask for that information. I will say right now that speakers are being asked to do virtual formats, much as we're doing tonight. But we have a whole host of materials that we can send out to you, some of which are translated as well. So you can request a speaker, you can request materials, you can visit the website, which is located on this slide, for more information. And Shalini does ask that she be given some time. She prefers 60 days, but she's willing to work with you to partner to bring health education out into the neighborhoods. Can you go to the next slide, please, Toya? The other group that we frequently get asked questions about are our neighborhood health ambassadors. These are grassroots advocates. They live in the neighborhoods in which they provide service. They're CPH community liaisons, and they're trained to make connections to community resources. So if you are interested in connecting to any of these ambassadors, or if you're interested in being an ambassador, just reach out and I'll put you in touch with Malika Brewer, who heads up that program for us. Can you go to the next slide, please, Toya? So neighborhood health ambassadors are located in these districts, and these overlay the Celebrate One districts because we feel that those neighborhoods have strong need for a neighborhood-based connection. And you can see there are 6 neighborhoods in there. And again, if you want to be connected to them, just reach out, okay? The next slide, please. Environmental health. This is where a lot of people think of public health. They think of our clinics, they think of our immunization clinics, they also think about our compliance end, a lot of things which are done through the Environmental Health Division. Licensing programs, which includes food protection, restaurants, grocery stores, mobile food trucks, temporary events, water and land protection as well. Our public swimming pools, body art, private sewage treatment, private water, solid waste, and environmental hazards. Tobacco 21, that's the initiative where we're working with area stores to make sure that 21 and older are the people who are purchasing tobacco products. Healthy Homes is an initiative where staff will go in and make sure your home is safe. Vector control includes outreach around mosquitoes, rats, and elimination of those issues, rabies and dangerous animals, and industrial noise. A lot of people don't always think about that, but that's another area that you can reach out to our environmental health team for support. Could you go to the next slide, please? So I wanted to end with this slide, which is about emergency preparedness, because that's the life that we've been living at Public Health. This is the team that works on creating emergency response plans, does training and exercises, and does the Ready in 3 initiative. And Ready in 3 educates residents on prevention, protection, and recovery from public health threats and hazards. So as you might imagine, we've been living in this zone for the last few months, and we'll probably continue to have elements of this going forward. But the Office of Emergency Preparedness, in addition to the things that I just mentioned, also coordinates training and planning efforts with partners from law enforcement, fire, hospitals, American Red Cross, the Franklin County and Columbus Medical Reserve Corps. So that's if you want more information about that, I would be glad to put you in touch with the team. We do have members that have great presentations, very specific to the emergency preparedness plans. If you could go to my last slide, Toya. Thank you. So I would be remiss if I didn't put up some very important resources around COVID-19. We do ask that everybody to avoid misinformation. I'm hearing about information overload around resources and messaging around COVID-19 these days. These are key websites and key sources of vetted important information. The first one is the Columbus Public Health Call Center. And that call center fields calls from across the city. Any question you have COVID-19 related, call that number, which is 614-645-1519. And one of the attendees will get you connected to the resource that you're asking for. The CDC website is another important website. The coronavirus of ohio.gov is another one, and the columbus.gov has a number of resources across many departments with the city. And then the last is the Franklin County website as well. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this today, and I'll stay on for any questions later. Thank you, Toya and all.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that. We're going to continue moving along. Our next presentation, and this is our last department that will be presenting, is our city attorney's office. We will have 3 individuals from the city attorney's office doing presentations. We'll start with Laura Baker Morris, and if you give me just a second, Laura, I will pull up your presentation. Bear with me. I'm sorry about that. There you go. Laura, you're all set whenever you're ready. Are you there, Laura? Yes. Let's unmute you. Okay, Laura, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right. So we're going to talk this evening about open meetings and area commissions. Very exciting topic to end the presentation, but it's some really important information going forward in helping you in your role in being an area commissioner. Next slide, please. So in the early 1970s, the Columbus City Council established the area commissions, and the purpose was to act as a liaison between the neighborhood groups and city government. And then in 1996, area commission provisions were moved from the zoning code to the planning and historic preservation code. And they defined a purpose for the area commissions. Next slide, please. They are to establish, to afford additional voluntary citizen participation in decision-making in an advisory capacity to facilitate communication, understanding, and cooperation between neighborhood groups, city officials, and developers. Next slide. So while the area commissioners have a number of important roles within the community, a number of you have already been working with the commissions for a long time, you're fully familiar with the roles that you have. For those of you that are new, we're looking at a couple different areas where the city code specifically talks about what the role of the area commission is. They hold hearings on problems and issues affecting the neighborhood. They recommend legislative solutions, make recommendations for restoration and preservation of historical elements, and most importantly for the conversation that I'm here to discuss tonight, they participate in decision-making by making recommendations on matters pertaining to rezonings, special permits, variances, demolitions, and zoning appeals. Next, please. So what does this all mean? It means that the way that we've defined area commissions within the Columbus City Code and under the Columbus City Charter is that area commissions are public bodies, and as a result, they have to comply with the open meetings provisions of the state law. So an area commission, with its commissioners appointed by the mayor, with its advisory role in decision-making process, is a public body and must comply with the Open Meetings Act. Next, please. So what are the requirements of the Open Meetings Act? The requirements are both simple and they can be more complex depending on a circumstance that can arise, but basically we're going to talk about what those requirements are tonight. The Open Meetings Act requires that public bodies conduct their business in meetings that are open to the public. And as we said, an area commission is a public body, so your meetings must be conducted in public. What is a public body? It's not just the commission, it's also the committees or subcommittees of the area commission. So if you have a zoning committee, if you have a subcommittee on elections, if you have a committee who deals with area issues, whatever you might have within your particular commission, any of those committees or subcommittees do constitute a public body and must conduct their business in open meetings. So what is a meeting? Well, a meeting is a meeting no matter what you call it. So we've had situations where it wasn't a meeting, it was a retreat, or it wasn't a meeting, it was a workshop. If in fact you meet the definition for a meeting, which is going to be on the next slide, you're a meeting regardless of what you call it. So let's take a look at that. It has to be a prearranged gathering of a majority of the members of the public body who are discussing or deliberating on public business. So prearranged gathering. So tonight, let's say we're here tonight and it's a prearranged meeting and there are some members of your commission and you look around on the screens up at the top and you say, oh my gosh, we've got the majority of the members are here. Are we in a meeting? No. First of all, it has to be a prearranged that you're meeting together for the purpose of discussing and deliberating public business. You're talking to one another. You're having a conversation with one another. Right now, you're listening to a presentation. You're all attending a seminar together. If you all happen to run into one another at the same movie theater, when we're allowed to go back to movie theaters again, and you just happen to all be there, that's not a prearranged gathering, and you're not discussing, deliberating public business. So it has to be all three of these things to be a meeting. It has to be a majority of the members of the public body. So a member of a public body must be physically present in person at a meeting in order to be considered present at that meeting and part of the quorum for that meeting. Now, don't get worried. We're going to talk a little bit at the end of my presentation about COVID-19 and how that's changed a bit, but this is the public meeting law in normal times, okay? So in normal times, persons be present in person unless a specific law permits otherwise, in order to be counted and be part of the quorum and in order to vote, okay? And you have to be discussing, deliberating on public business. So once again, if you just happen to run into one another out in public and you have a conversation, but you're not talking about public business, you're talking about your favorite recipe, you're talking about what you saw on TV last night, any of those things, you don't have a public meeting. But if you start talking about the things that the commission is considering and you start having a conversation about it, and you have a majority of your commission present when you do that, you're looking like you're coming into a public meeting. So discussion is an exchange of words, comments, or ideas. Deliberation is the weighing and examination of reasons for and against, and the discussion does not generally include information gathering, like we're doing here tonight, attending presentations, like you're doing here tonight, or isolated conversations between employees that are just kind of casual, again, talking about your day, that's going to be talking about the business of the commission. Next slide, please. The Open Meetings Act also requires that a public body give appropriate public notice of its meetings. Next slide, please. For regular notice must include the time and place of the meeting. And for Columbus City Code, it also requires that meetings be noticed in the city bulletin. So again, you need to let people know ahead of time when the meeting is going to be. You should be announcing within your bylaws, generally speaking, how often you're going to have them, what prearranged interval for your regular meeting. And if you're going to conduct a special or an emergency meeting, you have to provide at least 24 hours notice, and with the time, the place, and most importantly, the purpose of the meeting. It requires that, we'll go back, back. Oh no, it's going the other wrong way. There we go, okay. The Open Meetings Act requires that a public body make all of its meetings open to the public at all times. So that seems simple when you're talking about your actual regular area commission meeting, but that's also intended to mean that all of the conversations, the deliberations, the discussions are open to the public. Next slide, please. So when you have a secret ballot, if you're whispering to commission members one to another without the public being able to hear you, if you have a round robin discussion, you tell one person, then they tell the next person, then they tell the next person. All of those keep those discussions from being heard by the public, and therefore it's no longer an open meeting. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ever go into an executive session, which is when you can have a conversation that is private. But if you're going to do that, there are a couple of rules about it, and you must follow the rules in order for it to be an appropriate executive session. You have to first make a motion while you're in your regular meeting. You have to hear that motion. You have to do a roll call vote about whether or not you want to go into executive session. And then once there's a vote, you can go into executive session and excuse yourself from public view. But when you're doing that, there are only a few things you can actually consider when in executive session. Next slide, please. Personnel matters, which doesn't really come up in area commissions, but personnel matters would be appropriate. Purchase or sale of property by the public body, pending or imminent court action. So if the area commission got sued and Mr. Tobias or Mr. Dunbar, who'd be speaking after me, come and need to talk with you about the lawsuit, you can go into executive session to speak with your lawyer. Collective bargaining matters doesn't really come up very much. Matters that are required by law to be kept confidential. So if for whatever reason you are listening to a presentation by a developer and they indicate that there's something in their presentation that is a trade secret, I know it's not going to come up often, but it could, that's the kind of thing that maybe have to be by law kept confidential. Security matters if you're talking about the security for your area commission. Hospital trade secrets, confidential business information, and Veteran Service Commission applications. What you should notice is that not a lot of these things happen very often. So most of the time, your meeting is going to have to be conducted in open, in person, in front of the public. Next slide. The Open Meetings Act requires that a public body keep and maintain meeting minutes. So the minutes must be promptly prepared, they must be filed, they must be maintained, and they must be open to the public. You don't have to write down everything that everybody says. It doesn't have to be a verbatim transcript. It doesn't have to be recorded or videotaped, but there has to be enough details that the public understands and appreciates what happened in that meeting and why the public body made the decision that it did. Next. Thank you. So those are all of the general open meetings laws requirements that apply to area commissions most of the time. The General Assembly a few weeks back enacted emergency legislation and allowed for the Open Meetings Act to be amended during the period of COVID-19. So this will last either as long as the governor's order lasts, but it will last no later than December 1st of 2020 unless they seek to renew it. So for this period of time, while the governor's order, there's still an emergency health order from Governor DeWine, these provisions apply to your area commissions. It's going to allow members of a public body to hold, attend, and conduct meetings and hearings by means of teleconference, video conference, or any other similar technology. So that requirement I talked about a few slides ago about having to be in person, that particular requirement has been set aside during the period of the emergency, and you can instead conduct your meetings and hearings with teleconferences, video conferences, or similar technology. All members, however, must be attending via the technology, and they shall consider to be present when they are attending via that technology. So in other words, I'm talking to you right now and I'm attending. I don't necessarily have to be visible while I'm attending that meeting, but I have to be present and attending and listening to the meeting. If I step out, go out to the other room and then come back and there was a vote taken, and if you lost quorum because of that, then I'm not present for that particular vote. So even though we're doing this remotely, even though we're doing it virtually, we still have to all be present at the time that those actions are taken. Next slide, please. Thanks. Notice requirements have also been loosened up a little bit. It must provide notice within at least 24 hours in advance to the public and to the media and to any parties that are required to be notified of a hearing. Think about if you have a zoning hearing, you have somebody that's coming before you with a specific request, they would have to receive that notification. I know that the Department of Neighborhoods has been working hard on providing mechanisms by which you can provide this notice electronically. I'm sure that they'll be discussing that a little bit more in depth, but this will allow you to do this more informally than having to publish it in the city bulletin. You must use reasonable methods by which any person may determine that the time, location, and manner by which the meeting will be conducted. And again, that might be doing it through a web page or sending it out to a list of individuals that you have that routinely come to your area commission meetings, somewhere where the public can see it and hear it and observe it. Next, please. Public access must be provided that is commensurate method by which the meeting is conducted. And this is the hardest one. It's probably easy to get on a Zoom or a WebEx or some other kind of video conference, or even have a conference call among the members of the commission and even maybe the developer that's coming before you on a particular day. But the public has to also be able to access it. They have to be able to observe it, to see it, potentially to participate in if they're going to be a party that is going to be speaking before you on that day. And so you do need to make arrangements so that that can be possible with whatever video teleconferencing or teleconferencing you use. All the other provisions of the Open Meetings Act still remain in full force and effect. So you still have the meeting minutes requirements and the other requirements that we talked about earlier. Yesterday, Mayor Ginzer signed an executive order that also allowed for the bylaws of your various area commissions and for the rule about having to publish notice in the city bulletin to be suspended during this period of time to allow you to take advantage of these open meetings provisions. So if you had a specific bylaw in your area commission that would not have allowed you to have a meeting online, like for instance, you had a bylaw that says we always meet at this location at this date and time, and you can't meet there anymore because you have to see social distancing, that particular executive order will allow you to then take advantage of this law and meet electronically. So I'm going to kick this over to Robert Tobias, who's next. Is going to talk a little bit about public records. There's my contact information. I invest on emails, especially with COVID-19, but there is all the information if you need to get a hold of me.
Thank you, Laura. And I will, like she mentioned, we will continue with Rob Tobias. Rob, just give me a second. I'll pull up your presentation.
All right, you can hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Let's see here.
All right, you ready?
All right, Rob, you're up. Yes.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. My name is Robert Tobias. I'm with the Civil Division of the City Attorney's Office, Assistant General Counsel. And to piggyback on what Laura was speaking about, I'm talking about the Ohio Public Records Act. You can turn to the next slide, please. And basically, the act is in the revised code, Chapter 149. And it basically does a couple of important things related to you as area commissioners and your public meetings. It allows the public basically to look at state and local records kept by a public office. It also delineates certain records that are prevented from being disclosed. And it also allows for some enforcement measures if a request is improperly denied. Next slide, please. So Laura was talking about how the area commissions are considered public bodies for purposes of open meetings. Here for public records, the language is a little bit different. You have to be considered a public office. Their records considered kept by a public office, and there's a slight distinction between the two. And as you can see on this slide, the Ohio Revised Code and the Columbus City Code make it clear that an area commission is also considered a public office for purposes of maintaining records pursuant to the Ohio Public Records Act. And number 2 there on the slide indicates through the Ohio Revised Code, basically a public office includes, and it lists a variety of things, including political subdivisions, and it also talks specifically about the exercise of any function of government. And then more specifically, within the Columbus City Code, Chapter 3109 allows for the establishment of the area commissions and also creates the specific area commissions. Next slide, please. Now, what is a public record? So the important definition for a public record is in Ohio Revised Code 149.011G. And the most important thing to remember is that it's not going to be considered a public record unless all 3 of these provisions are met. And so you can see in number 1, document, device, item, regardless of physical form or characteristic. So I guess a long time ago you would consider it just to be paper, but now with technology being what it is, it can be in electronic form as well. And the second thing that's important is it's either created or received by or coming under the jurisdiction of the public office. So it is not necessarily things that you as an area commission create. It also could be documents that you take in that are received by the area commission as well, and that you then keep as part of your business and maintain. And that's also kind of moves into number 3. Any of the documents that are either created or received that serve to document, and this is a very long list here because they want it to be all-encompassing, the organization, functions, policies, decisions, procedures, operations, or other activities of the office. So if all 3 of those conditions are met, then the item would be considered a public record. Next slide, please. The one thing that I will say also about the Public Records Act is the analysis of it does lean more towards disclosure. So I know there may be a general tendency for people to initially think, well, how do I not disclose it, or how do I keep it from being disclosed? But the spirit of the Public Records Act is leaning towards disclosure. As specifically related to area commissions, here are some things that would be considered public records. As Laura was speaking about earlier, minutes from your meetings, even though they do not need to be verbatim, they are documenting specifically, what is discussed during a area commission meeting. And also, if the chair is creating an agenda for a meeting, that would be considered a public record as well. So there needs to be, you need to be aware of the fact that those things would be considered public records. Laura also spoke about zoning committees and any application packets that are submitted in conjunction with the zoning committee, and hearings that might take place also would be an example of a public record. Any of the money issues surrounding the operation of the area commission. And I'm going to kind of skip over number 4 for a second and talk about recordings of virtual meetings. So, again, in the age of COVID-19, if you are going to be using WebEx or Zoom or some other platform whereby those meetings are going to be recorded, those would also fall under the examples of public records, and then also bylaws that are kept by the area commission. Now, going back to number 4, I know that sometimes this creates some issues with commission members because they may not have a dedicated email address, a columbus.gov email address, or an address that's associated with that specific commission, and they may just be using their own personal email address. And it's important to know that if you are going to be using a personal email address for any kinds of communications that would relate to your work as a commissioner, that it's probably a good idea to have a separate folder and maintain those emails as they would be subject to being a public record. Next slide, please. So what is required of the Area Commission to maintain these public records? So they need to be kept in an organized manner so that a request can be answered timely. What timely means depends on the nature of the request. There have been some requests where it's hundreds or thousands of pages of document where an entity may be given weeks or months to comply. But if the request is only asking for a small number of documents or pages, the time frame may be a week to get that organized. There is a records retention schedule that should be followed for all the area commissions. That's provided by the Department of Neighborhoods. I've seen it recently. It looks like it's only about 1 page long, so that's pretty good, because I know a lot of other entities are pages and pages and pages for their retention schedule. So I advise folks to take a peek at it and know what's contained in it, and make sure that records are being kept in conjunction, in compliance with the records retention schedule. Next slide, please. So how can an area commission comply with a request? Basically, requests can be made in any order. They don't have to be on a standardized form. They can be made, as you can see, in a variety of different manners. They can even be made anonymously, and no reason has to be provided for the request. The second thing that I would say is that if you get a public request and it's just not clear, what the party is requesting, you are absolutely allowed to contact the party and ask them for some more details and let them know that you're confused or not sure of exactly what it is they're looking for. The more specificity somebody provides in a request, obviously the easier it will be for you to find those materials and supply them. Number 3, basically, you can have the person come to the location to inspect them. It's their preference, or they can request that copies be made. Again, copies doesn't always mean hard copies, paper. It could mean putting it on a flash drive and or emailing a file to somebody. And the last, number 4 on the slide, basically is indicating that in order to comply with a public records request, you do not need to create a new record or a new document. It's only what currently exists. Next slide, please. Probably most importantly, when should an area commission reach out to the city attorney's office for legal guidance? One thing that I did leave off the slide here, which I'll add now, is whether something actually qualifies as a public record or not. So if there's a specific item and you're just not sure whether it actually qualifies as a public record or not, based on that 3-step and that 3-question analysis, you're certainly welcome to call our office for some guidance. And then as the 4 bullet points here list, if you're not sure what records are being requested and you're not able to get more clarity from the requester, if you are not sure whether there's some exemption to a record and that it shouldn't be disclosed, if something should be disclosed, but there may be information on a particular record, like a social security number or a bank account, where it needs to be redacted, if you have questions about that. Or if you're getting a letter or a phone call or an email from the requester basically saying what's taking so long, or why haven't you complied, or we got your response and we don't think you're in compliance with our request, and you have concerns about that, you certainly can call our office for some additional guidance. I think that may be it. I think my contact information is on the next slide. So if you have any questions moving forward, my direct number's on there and my direct email address as well. And I think Steve Dunbar is going to be the last member of our team here to present.
Yes, he is. Thank you, Rob. Steve, give me just a second. I'll pull up your slide. Sorry about that. Just a second. All right, let's see here. Share. There we go. All right, Steve, you are up, sir. Are you there, Steve? Let's see if I can. Steve, you're not muted, so you should be able to speak for us to hear you. Okay, looks like we're having a little technical difficulty with Steve's audio. Let's see here. Steve, do you have your microphone on? Steve, are you able to call into the call for audio? Of course, we've been running smoothly all this time and wait to the last person for us to have some technical difficulties. Let's see here. Well, Steve, if you can try to call in, that would be helpful. And then we can try to catch your audio through the phone. In the meantime, I know that folks have been asking questions in the chat. We've been trying to capture those, and once Steve does his presentation and we are finished, we will address those questions. I think some of them have actually have been answered during the chat as well, but for those that have not been answered while we're on the presentations, we will definitely take time to get those questions answered. And again, everyone will receive a copy of all of the different presentations and materials that our presenters have supplied for you all, along with a survey. We're trying something new here with this virtual training. We're going to send you guys a link for a survey as well. So I would ask that you take some time, very short, to complete that and give us your feedback. And it looks like Steve is on now. So Steve, are you here?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Perfect. All right, I will turn it over to Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you very much. So I've just got the one slide. Really, I just wanted to get onto the training today to remind you all that we are still here. So with some changes in the city attorney's office, Laura and Rob are going to be your legal advisors. So open meetings, public records, the procedural stuff, the ethics stuff, all of that, they will be your go-to folks. That being said, my group is still here to handle all things nuisance abatement problem property. So we follow the police line. So our group is a zone initiative. We get our name from the 5 police zones. We have a map up there and a roster of our crew with direct email and phone numbers for each of them. So hopefully you know these names. My people will still be coming out to your meetings. They will not hit every single meeting, but we'll get out to them regularly enough. You know them, they know you. You can call them, you can email them, you can text them whenever you have a problem. So again, our kind of the meat of our work is nuisance abatement. That is basically any piece of property that is a pain in your necks. The way the law works is if you have chronic code violations at a piece of property, it's a public nuisance. Owner, occupants, residents, businesses all have varying duties to take care of problems. If they don't do that, orders come from different city departments. If they still don't get with the program, it comes to us for enforcement. So that is bucket number 1, chronic code violations. Bucket number 2, chronic criminal activity. So that is where we work with the police, primarily narcotics, the new PAC unit, also the CRT teams and the liaison officers. But chronic criminal activity, primarily violent crime, drug trafficking, we have the ability to take action to take care of those properties also. So I think if you want to think about everything, we're here primarily talking about the code violation side. Basically everything you heard from Tony, from Heather, from Rebecca, we're the enforcement arm for all of those groups. So they all have their own systems. They all issue orders. For the most part, it's like 80–85% of the time, all goes well. When it doesn't, it will come to our group. And what is nice about how we've set up our group is that same lawyer whose name you see there, who you're seeing regularly at your meetings, is the attorney who's going to handle those cases that come up in your neighborhood. So that can be anything from, an out-of-state investment trust that owns apartment complexes all over the country, that has problem apartment complexes here in Columbus. It could also just be a husband and wife in Hilliard that have a couple rentals on the hilltop. Large industrial sites, the zoning type of stuff that Tony was talking about, and then also just the house next door with those problems. So we can scale up or down as much as we need to make it work. We work just like we're talking to you folks regularly. We talk to the different city departments regularly to make sure that we are not just aware of kind of the normal violations they're getting, they're issuing notices, they come to us. What's nice is because we're the lawyers for everyone, we bring enforcement actions for everyone. We're able to figure out the way to get to that problem place, even if, a code violation doesn't get us there, or maybe the criminal side, we're not able to get an informant in a place. When we start looking at other avenues, with fire inspectors, with building inspectors, with uniformed officers, with covert officers, overwhelmingly, we are able to take care of that problem property. Largely, the biggest problem we have is just that it takes too long sometimes. But that being said, again, most everything you heard from the first few presenters tonight, if their process doesn't work, it comes to our group. The way we get there, overwhelmingly, they're either criminal or civil legal actions and environmental court. And again, overwhelmingly, we get there. It just takes longer than we'd like sometimes. And the one thing I will say is, always go through the front door. And what I mean by that is call 311, get it on record. Call the police, make a report. But that being said, then pick up the phone and call one of our folks or shoot an email to our folks. They will be able to follow up on the process as it's going through. And then as soon as it comes to us, and it is our case, that attorney who who is at your meetings is solely responsible for making the decisions related to that case. So we don't get to hide the ball from you. I mean, we don't get to hide from you physically. We're out and about. Then also the responsibility for making sure we get results for you all. So hold us to that. That is everything I have. Again, you've got name, number, email from my entire crew. I am always welcome to talk to you also, but start with them. They'll take care of you. That is all I have, Toya.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. And I just want to say thank you to all of our presenters. I appreciate you guys taking the time to share this information with our commissioners. They do some great work, and I'm hoping that this information was useful for them. We're going to move into our questions period. We have about 30 minutes. We're a little bit ahead of time, which is a great thing. We have about 30 minutes that we can address questions. The way I'd like to do that is I know that folks have been putting their questions in the chat. We've compiled those. We're going to go through and answer those questions first. So I'm going to let Beth then ask the questions to the various presenters. If they can answer, we'll go through it that way. And then once we get through the questions that have been put in the chat, we will be free to take questions from the presentation, live questions from there as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow Beth to go ahead and begin asking questions. So thank you again.
Thank you, Toya. Hello, everybody. So the first question, can you hear me? All right. Okay, good. So the first question was for Councilmember Tyson in her office. So the question is, so concerning parking, and this is from John Lathram with North Linden, who works with Smart Columbus and is aligned with CODA. So the goal is to support more public transportation as opposed to car ownership along Columbus's major corridors. For example, Cleveland Avenue will be getting more affordable housing. What negotiating skills can we use as a commission to encourage not only developers, but also City Council to lower the per person capita for parking spaces? What recourse does the commission have to encourage public transportation over parking spaces, and are there any new incentives to new neighbors moving to our urban corridors?
So I'm not sure if Councilmember Tyson,
She?
is she? No, she's there. I see her. Thank you.
Okay.
So I think that it's going to take a longer discussion, but especially around, are there incentives for individuals to be able to promote more public transportation? I think that's a different discussion, but we certainly can have that. I think that certainly most of the affordable housing projects do require, or not require, I should say that they absolutely are wanting less parking spaces because they feel like people are probably going to be using more public transportation. But I think that when there are projects coming into your community, that we need to, prior to them coming, probably have some discussions with parking, have discussion. We need to bring a group together to have some discussions around parking and transportation in your community.
Thank you. So the next question is kind of combined from Libby and Stephen. And the question is about density, okay, and education. Just making sure. And how do we, how can City Council educate about density for the community?
So we were planning on having a hearing with planning, development, basically planning, development, looking at traffic. We were going to have a conversation with all the directors from the administration to have those conversations. And we know that it's very important to do that. And part of it is also looking at Morpsey's plan. So we do understand the importance of having this conversation about density, so people have an idea of the number of people that are going to come to our community and how important it is for us to have density. So the administration is on board with this. And so I know we will have hearings. I think once we have hearings, then it would be people coming out to the community and sharing it, well, whenever that happens, or either we hear it through these Zoom meetings, but certainly sharing this information. And I personally have held a meeting with planning, development, transportation, public utilities. We've had these conversations, and we understand how important it is to be sharing it with our residents, with the air commissions in particular.
Thank you. And then the next question, I'm just going to make sure that I get this correct, but there was a question on the chat for you about how for the commissions to help their community when council and the commission and the committees within the commission, how things, when votes are different. I'm kind of combining a few different chat items that came through that.
Sorry, so when votes are different between which groups?
I'm hitting too many buttons, sorry. Okay, so the question is when and it says the city, but I'm assuming that's meaning council. When it's rules different from the committee and the commission, how can they help share the information to the populace?
So again, I guess when the committee, which is mean the area commission, has a vote, I'm just trying to be clear, they vote one way. Is that what you're asking? And council votes a different way? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and if this came from, I'm paraphrasing Stephen because it came from a few. So if I'm not getting that correct, Stephen, but that is the gist of what I understand.
And then how do they communicate that to their residents? Is that it?
Yes.
So if we are voting differently than what the commission voted, I would hope that as a zoning chair that I have communicated that information with the with the zoning chair, the area, the commission chair, because we're not going to vote. We're just not going to all of a sudden just vote, in opposition from what the commission has stated without having meetings. And so if it requires, once that vote has taken place, I think if it still requires the council coming out and sharing that, whether that be at a commission meeting, if residents want to come to a meeting, I think we're open to doing that and sharing why the vote was different than what how the commission voted. But it should not be a surprise because we should have had conversations.
Thank you. And that's all the questions that I had for the council member. Thank you so much. So Tony Celebrezzi answered I think all of his questions during his presentation about architectural review. And he explained the non-conforming uses when it came to Cleveland Avenue. Okay, just going through. And Heather Truesdale, code enforcement. Is Heather still here?
I don't know. I don't think Heather is on the call anymore.
Okay.
But what we can do is we'll make sure that whatever question was addressed to her, we'll forward that on to her.
Okay, great. Yeah, because there were questions about yard sales and some charity boxes, and 311 I think was one of the recommendations to call. And so we'll get that.
So
and
whoever asked those questions, we'll share your information with Heather as well.
Yes. Is Rebecca still on?
I am.
Yes.
Hi, Rebecca. So one of the questions that came through, Marion Harris asked, are there volunteer opportunities through your department during the pandemic?
Well, we're still figuring those things out, including summer internship opportunities. But the best way to get the most updated information is to call the COVID Center line number, which is 614-645-1519, and they can give you the most updated information. And in the chat box, I also included again my direct line for Marion or anybody else on the call who would like to reach out to me to ask more information about volunteer opportunities.
Okay. And there's also a question. So there was a question while you're presenting about stormwater, but we're going to refer that to public utilities. And I know there was a question about lead testing.
Yes, and I sent a clarifying, I don't know if Marion Harris is still on the
Okay.
call, but I was wondering, is she talking about those under the age of 6? Because of course that's a different legal requirement, right? Mm-hmm. Or is she talking about young school age children? Those are two different categories with two different responses. But I'd be glad to send to you, Toya, some summary of that after the call, because I feel like I need a little more information exactly what she's looking for. But in essence, state law mandates lead testing for kids under 6 years if they live in a zip code determined to be a high risk area. And all Medicaid enrolled children at ages 1 and 2 and up to age 6 are also needing to take this test too. But I know that Columbus Public Health has been working on some innovative programs with our area schools. So I'd be glad to get Marion or anybody else who's interested in this very important topic connected with our appropriate team at Public Health.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And no, she is not on the call, but we'll make sure she gets the response to the question.
So the next questions came from our city attorney's office. We had a few, there were a few questions about, one was, it was about open meetings. So if an area commission or a few area commissioners go and they meet with a member of our neighborhoods team to express concerns, does that constitute a meeting requiring open meeting provisions? They're meeting with city staff or neighborhood liaisons.
Laura still there?
I don't think Laura is, no, she is still here. She's just muted. Let's see here. Laura, I've unmuted you if you're able to respond. Laura, you're unmuted, so you can speak.
Yeah, you can't hear me. I'm still here.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me. Oh, fantastic.
Yes.
All right. So the answer is, of course, it depends. So if it is a couple of commission members and those couple of commission members constitute a quorum for your commission and you're speaking about public business that would be before the commission, then it could be a meeting. If, on the other hand, your commission consists of, 17 people and there's 2 of you that met with a constituent, then that's not a public meeting that requires an open meeting.
Okay, thank you. And I hope that answered the question. The next question was about the city bulletin. There was some confusion about that and if it's needed to be used.
Fault.
Okay.
Okay. So that is my fault. So it's been a very busy week and it's only Wednesday. When I was talking about the executive order in the city bulletin, there were actually specific provisions of the city code that required publication in the city bulletin for the commissions that work with BZA and graphics and the downtown commission. It was not the area commissions. That is my fault entirely. While the emergency legislation does allow you now to have more loose notification than your bylaws might require, and the executive order does allow you to loosen up your bylaw notification requirements. So if your bylaws require something specific, you can now follow the emergency order instead, but there is not a specific requirement that previously that you would publish your meetings in the city bulletin. There are some other requirements for publication in the city bulletin. For instance, if you amend your bylaws or your regulations, there's a publication requirement for that. But I apologize, it was the other commissions that had a specific requirement in the city code that they be published in the bulletin.
Thank you for that, Laura. I think I answered in the chat as well. Someone asked, do other commissions post in the city bulletin? And I responded, yes. That is one of the things I think we also are encouraging the commissions to do through the 3109 best practices. I think we had asked if you know your schedule for the year, you meet the third Tuesday of every month at 6:30, your meeting location. If you provide that schedule for the year, we can post that and it will be out there. That can serve as an official notice for you. Although we do know that the commissions post on their websites and in other ways, it is also a way for us to ensure that it is out there in the public through the city bulletin, which runs every Saturday of the year.
Right.
Thank you. And if I'm missing anyone's questions, please, I am seeing the chat. And Stephen, thank you for clarifying the question that I did pose to Council Member Tyson about the difference between council and BCA. A question, this Toya I think would probably go to our department in regards to email for commissioners or a communal drop for minutes and other business that could be shared.
So we are encouraged. We the city cannot provide commissioners with a city email address, right? That we've communicated that over the past few years. But what we have encouraged the commissions to do, and I know many of you have done this, is to create, say, for instance, I'll just use Mac because Quay's picture is large on my screen right now. But they have like a quaybarnes.mac@gmail.com, right? So, and I know a couple of the other commissions use Greater Southeast, I think, also use like a Greater Southeast Area Commission at gmail.com account. And so we encourage the commissions to use that to create those generic type of email accounts that can be used for your commission business, right? So that we don't have to worry about your personal emails and communications that go into that. So for that, I can say that the city cannot provide a city like a Columbus.gov account, but we do encourage you to create those free generic accounts for your commissions. And like I said, a lot of them already do use some type of standardized email account. The second part of that question was what, Beth?
Oh, sorry about that. The second part of the question was a communal Dropbox for minutes and other business items.
So we do not have a communal piece, but I know that we have shared with you guys, I think even maybe at the end of the year at one of our last trainings, that we would be working on trying to do some websites because we know that all the commissions don't have websites. We are actually working, we're actually, I drafted the contract here just this week. We're working with a third party to be able to design web pages for or websites for the commissions. We already know that some of the commissions have outstanding websites, and at this point we're not trying to tell you that you have to change any of that kind of thing, but we will create a landing page for all area commissions that will have a link to either a commission's existing website, right, where they store their minutes and notices and things like that, or to the new page that we're going to be creating for those commissions that don't have websites. So with that is where you can put your minutes and your agendas and things like that. It will be you'll be able to upload that information. So that will be a repository for your particular commissions. I'm hoping that answered the question. So that will be coming. Like I said, we're working on it as we speak. It is in process. So as we talked last year, I think we said we would try to have something ready for you guys by the end of the year, and we're still trying to meet that commitment that we provided.
So if there are any other questions, those are all the questions I have. I think the records retention question you answered about making sure that we have that. And there's anything else.
If any of you all don't have copies of your record retention schedules, like I said, please just reach out to your liaison. We can make sure. I know that they pass them out early on, but we have a lot of new commissioners that have come on since then. So we will be more than happy to provide you with a copy of the records retention schedule. You can get it from your neighborhood liaison.
Yeah, and Jennifer just asked about, will you pay for it when you mention the website? Is there a cost?
So we're paying for this initial, the entire setup, all of that is included. Again, we're still working because I know that is something that we talked about for the past couple of years. I think at our very first kind of retreat with the leadership of the commissions was websites. And I know it's taken us a while to kind of get to where we are now, but that is something that, again, your area commission funds that is an eligible expense. And so we encourage you guys who are not using those funds to do that. We're going to be working on a more long-term piece. Again, this is kind of our short-term answer to the question, to get those commissions that don't have a website up to par so that all commissions have some type of digital footprint when it comes to internet access or internet accessibility from the community. So this is kind of our first step. So short answer to your question is initially no, because we're taking care of that. But if there is a fee, I mean, that is something we have to discuss if the Department of Neighborhoods will take on again, or if it's something that can just be included in the funding that you guys receive. Like I said, currently I know a lot of the area commissions do pay for it. It may be $150 for the year or something like that. depending on what platform they're using. But Jennifer, we can address that. Initially, no, there won't be a cost for those that we're creating right now. Right. So those, if you have a website now, we'll just continue to tell you guys to pay for that. Obviously, if you don't want to switch over to what we'll be creating for you.
And those are all the questions that I saw in the chat.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you, Beth. It is 8:18, so we are 12 minutes ahead of schedule. I appreciate you guys sticking with us. Some of you guys got on at 5:45, and I appreciate you guys hanging in there with us for the past 2.5+ hours. And so I'm hoping that this information was beneficial to you. We will be sharing, again, those presentations with you via email. And I, again, will encourage you to please answer the survey that is in there. Would love to get your feedback. This is the first training that we've done of this sort with the commissioners. And so I'm hoping that you guys found it easily accessible and informative. But again, I want to thank all our presenters, all our city partner departments for taking the time out to share this information. And again, if you guys have any questions, you know how to reach us. You have all of your liaisons contacts. You have my contact, David Huey, who is the supervisor for the liaisons. He's on the call as well. I know many of you have spoken with him. Just feel free to reach out to us. You know, our office is accessible and here to assist in any way we can. So with that, I will say thank you again. Have a great evening and enjoy the rest of your week.